Central. We're joined by Ben Spielberg, talking a little bit about healthcare policy, Medicare for all, that kind of fight. Very much looking forward to all of that. But for folks who are unfamiliar, these streams are a little bit more casual. I'm going to be hanging out, answering questions, so feel free to jump into the chat. Something's going on with the sound. Y'all can't hear me? Let's see. See if this fixes it. All right, well, we got that fixed. I'm hoping. All right, yeah. There's a delay. I'm sorry. I appreciate all the chats here. I get there's like a 45-second delay between the chat and what's actually happening live. So anyways, we are all good. So we'll be joined this week by Daniel Spielberg to talk about a little bit of Medicare for all, healthcare policy, and that fight. Looking forward to that. Wednesday, 7 Central. I'm going to start in a second to talk a little bit about this Biden stuff, because there's a story, and it's something we all know about, but it hasn't really been covered. It's been really quiet, the kind of failure of the Biden administration on this front. And we'll get to that in just 1 second. Just wanted to say thank you to all of our patrons and people who have been supporting us over these past few months. I'm really looking forward to expanding the project very soon. And we'll have some more announcements on that front. And for new folks, these streams are a little bit more casual. I'm happy to take questions from the chat on a bunch of different things, hang out, hear what's on y'all's mind. Just give me 1 second and we should be good to go. Well, let's start with this Biden story, because for folks, I'm sure many people listening to this recognize how important these unemployment extensions have been for working people. One thing that the pandemic showed, I think, a lot of voters is that the government can be doing a hell of a lot more direct support for people. And the response we've gotten from the federal government, let's not paint this in the wrong way, has been nowhere near adequate. But for many people, they thought that there wasn't even an option for the government to sort of step in and patch over kind of social and economic problems, directly in their life by doing things like extending unemployment benefits, providing things like free healthcare, things of that nature. And, of course, we didn't see the kind of permanent structural changes that we would like to have seen. But I think it was something that was very, very popular, especially with working people. You saw a lot of people having a little bit more money in their pockets, giving them a little bit more confidence going week to week. And these things are something that would be an incredible starting place to build out from. But what we're seeing already from the Biden administration is this kind of desire to distance themselves from what seems to be some of the more popular parts of the CARES Act, right? Notably, unemployment extension. Unemployment extension has been not just a benefit to some folks, but a literal life and death issue. It has allowed people to provide for themselves and for their families during this horrific time, which unfortunately looks like we might be heading towards another big uptick in COVID cases, right? Which means this is not the time by any means to be clawing back economic benefits that are going to working people. And the reason that those benefits have been attacked is because the government, both on the Republican and on the Democratic Party side, effectively serves the interests of capitalists, and most notably, in this case, small business owners. And there's been so much clamoring. We all know about these kind of ridiculous pieces that have been popping up in local media and also national media about, nobody can, small restaurants can't hire workers or anything like that. They always fail to mention the fact that these people tend to be, these employers tend to be offering people jobs at, around $7 an hour with very marginal tips or things of that nature. And people don't want to go back and work in those conditions, especially if they are worried that they're not going to be protected from the virus, either because the company won't provide them with the standards that are needed, or because, especially in a lot of parts of the country where COVID restrictions have been completely lifted, it's frontline workers, it's restaurant workers who are sort of left to enforce, or basically, in most cases, just not enforce because it's just not worth the hassle. Things like mask rules and things of that nature. So these benefits, unemployment benefits, have been very, very critical for a lot of families to get by, especially people who, rightfully so, don't want to bring the virus back into their communities and into their families, people who are taking care of folks who either can't get the vaccine or people who still have, pretty severe, medical issues that could be very much aggravated by any kind of COVID exposure, right? So more and more people are basically refusing the bottom end of labor, right? Low wages, lack of protections, no health care, things of that nature, and said, if I'm going to go back to work, you need to make it worth our time. And what you saw from this little bit of competition, from the small bourgeoisie, the small business owners, was not what you typically would be told by any kind of like right-wing conservative economist, right? That wages would go up. You saw people sitting on you saw employers basically doing what is called a capital strike, where they refused, to invest the money in their own employees, right, into their own businesses that would be necessary, right, to attract labor, and instead you saw them immediately start to lobby the government, and making this case that the reason that people aren't going into work at these jobs is not because they're low pay or they're low quality jobs. They don't have any kind of security. Oh, but it's because all of these lazy people are just sitting on their butts at home, which has never, ever, ever been proven to be true. So you saw around 26 state governors, including here in Texas. You also saw in Oklahoma, Indiana, Maryland, governors basically refusing to allow the extended unemployment benefits for workers, right? Basically saying we're not going to take the federal money that is protecting people's livelihoods, making sure that people aren't starving during this period, because they understand their role, which is to act as a disciplining force on a more demanding workforce, on a more demanding labor market, right? The government. The governors of these states recognized that their job is to break the kind of worker confidence that you were seeing from people who were refusing low quality jobs. And they did that by cutting or canceling the extended unemployment benefits, which again, extremely popular with workers, extremely popular certainly with people who've been receiving them. And a great example that more and more programs that are able to affect and reach people all across the country are beneficial, because they can break down a lot of kind of nonsensical Democrat versus Republican divides, rural versus urban divides, right? When you have programs that are beneficial, that are simple, that people feel like they're getting a benefit from, they're very popular. These programs, again, were only unpopular with career politicians and with capitalists, people who make money off of exploiting other people's labor. So what happens here? Let's not forget too that we're talking about 4.1 million workers. So what happens? You see this Republican and Democrat, backlash against this really popular program, the unemployment extension of the unemployment benefits, and you see these states refuse to accept them anymore, right? And despite some kind of despite all of this, right? You see almost nothing from the federal government, almost nothing from the Biden administration. Some really, really kind of timid pleas to say, oh, please don't, knock these out. But those are almost immediately washed over with Jen Psaki, for example, saying that governors are completely within their rights to pull back these unemployment benefits, right? And this is one of those moments, and this is the crux of this story, where the Biden administration's timidness is not only damaging for working people, right? But it's just such bad politics. Because if you were to be showing up for people and saying, oh, look, this is, what happened to all this kind of talk of the Biden administration? Biden's going to be, one of the great pro-worker presidents. In practice, you see a complete retreat whenever there's any kind of fight. And this is a fight, I'm sorry, if you're just like a career politician like Biden, this is an easy one to do because it's, even though you have some Democratic stragglers, you can really frame this as a Democrat versus Republican thing. But of course, this is a good reminder of the fact that even though these political parties have significant differences when it comes to answering the call of the money classes, they both come running. And what's so disgusting about this case is that you basically hear from Biden and Psaki and all these folks this kind of argument that, well, there's nothing that we can do to stop these governors from refusing to accept the assistance to extend these unemployment benefits. And that's just not true. In about 5 states, workers have filed lawsuits to make sure that these unemployment benefits do not dry up. And in Maryland and Indiana, they won. And the Biden administration should have been a party to those lawsuits. But instead, what you were getting from administration officials was this kind of argument that, like, well, there's nothing that we can do. Completely ignoring the fact that there is plenty that you can do on like the public arena, making the argument for these, and also making it really politically unexpedient for GOP governors to be cutting these along with Democratic governors, right? Make it so these people are afraid to touch those benefits. But you immediately saw a retreat. And not only a retreat, but essentially an opening of the gate saying, oh, there's nothing that we can do. And it was working people and working organizations. And these haven't been won in all states. I'm just saying in Maryland, the lawsuit was successful, and I believe in Indiana as well, in blocking them from being able to pull these, blocking them from cutting the unemployment benefits, right? These were working people, workers, showing up and fighting with every weapon that they had in their arsenal to make sure they did not lose these benefits that have been saving people's lives. And from the Biden administration, you saw almost nothing when it came down to actual functional support. And people would like to see, let me pull this up real quick for y'all. Hold up. If folks would like to read up more on this, and this is definitely something that you should be checking out. Let me see. There's a really good piece, long-form piece on this by the great folks at the Daily Post. They're Julia Rock and Andrew Perez, who you should definitely be supporting if you aren't already. They do incredible deep dive journalistic work that really does get into the policy, but doesn't sort of get lost on the basic politics here. And it goes through the extent of the unemployment assistance program, how much it means for folks, and also the criticisms of Biden. And we're going to be watching these fights as they continue throughout the country because they will be ongoing. But this is one of those moments where the Biden administration is continuing to sit on the sidelines on something that they should be owning. I just wanted to acknowledge real quick our friend Ange from Australia, who has a great channel. Y'all should be checking out. What Do You Mean? Thanks so much for the super chat, and good morning to you. Appreciate seeing you in here. So these kind of fights are really critical, and let me break down why it's so frustrating, because there were so many of these bullshit takes early on in the Biden administration that he was going to be a kind of secret and reluctant FDR, right? Any kind of person with just basic political instincts should recognize that when you have programs that are extremely popular, that you can make the kind of argument that, look, we're trying to provide for people, we're trying to help out communities, and you don't take that stance and instead take on this kind of, well, there's some things that are out of my control, and also, yeah, you might be right. that this extremely popular program that I've been helping to orchestrate and manage might actually be bad, right? I mean, you're shooting yourself in the foot. And on top of that, what's so despicable to me about the Biden administration's retreat on this is a great example of the damage that this kind of two-party system does to working class people who live in red states, right? They love to come here and to do photo ops and to and to be so worried about people in Texas, right? When it comes time to sending out emails to get fundraising dollars. But when it comes time to fight for working people in the state of Texas or in Alabama or in Indiana, right? They get so timid. And this is a kind of thing this is basic survival stuff. What Abbott is doing, what all these other GOP governors are doing, is they are hoping that they can starve out working people to make them go into the front lines and expose themselves to this virus, expose their families to this virus, and also force them to return to the kind of jobs that were unfit for them a year and a half ago. And what I mean by that is low wages and no benefits. The conditions right now that we're seeing should be really opening up a lot of space for worker militancy, and we're seeing more and more people going out on strike, and we're starting to see more and more people demanding more, which is why the government is doing what its functional role is in a capitalist society, is making sure that the field doesn't tilt out of favor for employers over employees, right? For bosses over workers. And they're going to come in and they're going to eradicate this extremely popular political program, right? To try to force people to go back to work. And the Biden administration, who supposedly should be the ones who are sitting around saying, like, this is our program, we're fighting for it, we're fighting for working families, are on the sidelines and they're just letting it happen. And I just think that they haven't gotten enough flack yet from the left on this, because it's not one of those things where it's like it's sitting on his desk and it's happening. It's a slow-moving process, and it's something that you sort of mentioned as like, oh, well, this state's eradicating the benefits, right? Oh, or like you even have it as more of like a kind of like academic argument about, oh, does too much financial support prevent people from going and taking low-wage jobs, right? Instead of seeing what it actually is a real life, right in front of your eyes, class struggle exposing itself to you. And the Biden administration is taking the side of the bosses. And they're also doing it with this kind of political calculation that will let people really suffer in other parts of the country, right? But in our bases, right, in blue states, we'll let these benefits continue. Instead of taking this as a firebrand political issue that it is. It's to me, I find it to be a ridiculous failure to take advantage of a moment like this. Sanders is out there continuing to fight on it, but you're seeing for the most part silence from the Democratic Party majority on this one, except that, again, as a kind of like a rhetorical barb. And this should be something that is very simple and easy to sell. Well, let's hear some questions from y'all. I mean, the thing is with Biden is he could just literally just use the government's resources, the federal government resources that he controls, to be party in these lawsuits. Put some pressure on them. Make this into a political fight. Make these governors go out publicly and constantly and make this the big issue of the day. Go out and have to say, no, we want to continue to deny people benefits. We want to make sure that people, if you lose your job, you're going to lose everything, right? Just very clearly, stand up for working people. And and I don't want anyone to misunderstand this, because I always get, people saying like, well, it's like, well, you know who Biden is. Well, of course I do. And this is, he's not going to do this. But you have to point these things out so people can recognize what we're missing, right? You can't just sit around and say, well, the Democrats and the Republicans are the exact same party, and then not, if you're one of those people who makes that argument, and then not spend time pointing out what these people do when they're in office, right? Because I think that there is a difference between the Democratic and the Republican Party. But what you see very clearly here is their willingness to fight for people, especially on things that are like, the economy is opening itself up for a pretty massive reshuffling of worker power versus bosses power, right? And what you're seeing before your eyes is Biden trying to sweep up these changes that were made to basically put the American economy on life support while the COVID pandemic was raging through society, right? Remember, Matt and I always made this point, is that while some of these things were beneficial that they were doing, none of these were structural. They all had time limits on them. And now you're starting to see this kind of walk back from it. I think it's really important to make that distinction, to point that out. One, just because you're like, oh, well, screw Biden. But two, for people to recognize that this is what they were always worried about, was about any of these changes becoming permanent, right? Even though that the politics of it points you in one direction. What I mean by that is, these are popular policies. You can run on these. People like them, but they're not embracing them. They're not saying, this is what we've done for the people, right? Instead, they're accepting all the arguments against them and allowing their opposition to take away much needed benefits for millions of people, especially in parts of the country, Texas being one of them, where they were, going on almost a year ago saying that they were going to flip it. They were going to turn Texas into a Democratic Party state. So, what happened to fighting for all those voters who showed up for you, Joe? It's just, it's a joke. So Sean has an intro, and I'm going to go through the chat and look at some of these questions. Lindsay Miller says, hope you all are having a nice day. David, are you going to address climate change on today's stream? Well, I'd be happy to talk about something if you have any specific questions. I did a pretty in-depth one about the kind of failure of the Biden administration and what I call the believe science crowd versus a kind of structural reshuffling crowd. And what I mean by that is, a lot of the folks who, they might want to cite examples of how climate change is affecting everything around us, but they refuse to start having the actual structural conversations about what needs to happen. And what I mean by that is, we need to take democratic control over our power grids. We need to be taking as many opportunities as we have to be nationalizing extractive industry, so that we'll have the ability to control them and not allow them to continue to run and reshuffle our politics at their whim. But yeah, I'm happy to talk about anything if you have any specific questions. Sean says, while the extension of benefits are not only essential, but should be even far more generous, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that this is also being used by Fortune 500 companies of further consolidation. I mean, that was happening earlier on in the pandemic too. I mean, you even saw the Starbucks CFO, being very giddy about the fact that they were going to be able to buy up a lot of coffee shops. I mean, there's no doubt about it that these programs, not just the unemployment, and less so the unemployment, I wouldn't say actually, but a lot of these, paycheck protection program, things like that, they really did benefit a certain kind of corporate entity that had longstanding relationships with banks, instead of these smaller operations that just weren't able to navigate the bureaucracy. I think there's no doubt about it that's going on. Yeah, and this is a great point by La Rose Blanche. If I weren't being paid enough to even be able to show up to work, why is it right for Biden to force me to work at a job that can't even cover the gasoline expenses? And from Australia says, when I tell people in Australia about the hospitality industries you guys have in the USA, when I explained that tips make up people's wages. It isn't just extra money; their jaws drop. For sure. I mean, and let me see. I think I had a lekism saved here for review. Where did I put it? I think this is a really good point. Matt's good at putting these guys together. But Matt says on January 14th, don't want to give people so much money that they aren't desperate to serve a capitalist for sustenance. That's the line they're afraid to cross. Has little to do with the national debt. He's 100% right, and he spends time basically looking through the nonsensical freak out that the benefits were too generous, and he highlights this right here. This is recently, and this is from Derek Kerr. He says, I got an email from a Lyft driver who read my story about driver pay being fleeting. Urged by Lyft bonuses, he said he made $30 an hour during the pandemic. I knew it wouldn't last. Now Lyft has slowed financial incentives and his pay fell back to $10 an hour or less. From a business perspective, I know why. Lyft has stopped paying drivers incentives, he said. But it shows who they really are. Moreover, someone like me who drove throughout the pandemic is forgotten. Well, not even recognized by the company, not even a thank you. I really have few employment options. I lost my job last year and I'm now 60 and have had a few health issues, the Lyft driver said. I applied for disability but was denied. Working for Lyft and Uber is an act of desperation. That is what most people don't understand. We drive because we have to for now. No one forces me to drive, but I don't have many options either. That's what keeps Lyft and Uber in business, economic inequality. And there's no doubt about it. I mean, that's why there's so much of the innovation in the economy over this past decade. It's just been finding ways, people trying to give people options to find ways to commodify almost every hour of the day to try to fill in the gaps. And this system really relies on this kind of reserve army of labor, people who come in and do jobs for low pay without a lot of kind of stability in them. And the role of Biden continuing this system and basically not putting up a fight when he should be owning the policies that help people out in the first place. It's baffling on a kind of general like political observer level, but as a Marxist, as a socialist, it becomes very clear why they're doing this is because they don't want to see class power move in a certain direction. They don't want to see working people more and more emboldened, and that's why all the people early on in the Biden administration who were saying things like, "Oh, he's going to be some kind of sneaky FDR. He's going to be a secret working class president." We're full of it. It's just such a joke. Our friend Val, I appreciate the chat here. I've seen some people calling for a new Chartist movement. Thoughts: can building consensus around a policy platform help build a winning movement? So I'd like to see if you can send it to me later. People calling for this, I'd be curious what their reasoning is. But to the second question, can building consensus around a policy platform help build a winning movement? I mean, you have to have the policies, but it's one of I don't want to create a false binary because of course you have to have the policies, right? Peace, land, and bread, right? I mean, even that's like old school Soviet stuff. And in our case, it's things like higher minimum wage, Medicare for all, etc. But I do think that it's less so much finding the kind of perfect, policy proposal for, that's going to just create the coalition as much as it is about creating the power to build the policies, the ability to do that. And let me deepen that a little bit to make it clear. Medicare, you can look at all the polling and you see things like, oh, Medicare for all, extremely popular. Extremely popular with both Democrats and Republicans, right? And then you look at the political arena and you see that it's very much not on the agenda. And the reason for that is the same reason that Biden's not fighting right now for unemployment benefits for people. Even though, like, you'd think on a kind of like just basic political sense that he would want to do that because he could say, this is my legacy, this is my party's legacy, this is what we do, right? We fight for working people. They're basically sitting down and rolling over as the Republican Party, eradicates all these benefits. It's a similar thing with Medicare for all. The Democratic Party wants to run on that. It changes the game dramatically politically, right? You can see a situation where they'd be winning elections. But why do they not do that? Well, it's because Medicare for all is what, I would argue is a non-reformist reform, right? Medicare for all doesn't eradicate capitalism, but it protects working people from one of the most powerful weapons that the boss has. Other than just controlling people's wages, controlling people's access to health care. And you see that in Bessemer, Alabama. After that strike vote failed, most people said it was because they were afraid if there was any kind of like labor militancy, they might lose their health care in the meantime, right? And this is why it's important to note that it's bigger than just having the right policy to win. And what do I mean by that? Let's just go back to that Bessemer example. Obviously, the union wasn't going, saying, "Oh, join the union, you'll lose your health insurance," right? They were arguing that they would be expanding all of these things, right? And that was popular with people, but there was a doubt that they could win, right? And so they didn't show up and they didn't vote to unionize in Bessemer. And now take that and expand that to like the political realm. This is why sometimes I think people who think that all you need in your community is basically one person who's just going to run on like being a bold progressive, right? And that's just going to create the constituency. It's not, because politics for most working people in this country is, and in the UK as well, Val, where I believe you're at, we're in this moment of what I call severe political depression, where people see engaging in politics as almost as like a defensive mechanism. It's never anything aspirational, right? And as a friend Ronan Burtonshaw said, editor of Tribune, when he was with Michael and I on a stream about a year or two ago, the job of socialists is to convince working class people that politics can change their lives. And I would extend that to say, and the only way we can do that is by starting to build these organizations that are centered around these important policies, right? But are also centered around this idea that the only way that we can enact the things that we want is by having working power, by being organized, by standing with one another. So, it's obviously it's a both and kind of thing. But I think that sometimes people get so fixated on like the policies being right that they miss the fact that you need the power. Right? Rahul says they've been watching Michael Brooks's right-wing Mandela clips. God, that guy was hilarious. Do you have any anecdotes about his sketch? I mean, I enjoyed it just as much as you seem to. My only thing with Michael is that he would just have an idea like that was so funny. Basically mocking conservatives who try to say that Nelson Mandela basically would stand with them today, right? I'm pretty sure that was what's his name, the dinosaur conservative from Rick Santorum, right? I believe it was Rick Santorum who said something like that, and I believe that's the origin of the sketch, that Nelson Mandela, would be a Republican or something like that. So Michael, created that character, which I think was great, and that's why he was so funny. Lindsay says, I'm just getting to this now. Oh, Um, First steps, I'll just give this to you quick. Lindsay says, what do you think the first steps would be in the climate change fight? But you're right. They refuse to talk about it. I think the number one opening that we have right now, and it's not the most exciting things for some folks to talk about, but is taking control of our power grids. From New York to Texas right now, people are realizing that these things are built on shoddy infrastructure. They're very much under threat. And people aren't happy with the service. So we should say that we should claw back public power and make it public again, not just publicly administered and then having private entities like do all the operation and production, right, and distribution. Completely publicly controlled. Claw back the privatization from this industry because I mean, when you're talking about climate change, you're talking about energy production, and the first thing we need to be doing is taking energy production back under our control. And I think it's good to present the socialist vision when you're doing these things, but you don't even have to. You can just say, don't you think this is something that we should be administering instead of allowing private or semi-private organizations to be running it? And that's the fact pretty much everywhere. I had a chat here. Jacob wants to know, pencils out. Pedro Castillo gets sworn in tomorrow. Did you see the video of Evo crossing the border on foot, flanked by a swarm of campesinos? No, I didn't. Please send that to me. I'll look it up a little bit later. So happy to see that victory is starting to develop. It's a really exciting thing. I mean, Pedro Castillo, I think, is such a great. It's just such a really exciting synthesis and new move in politics. Larry says, the scary thing about Uber is that they managed to take the monopoly on taxi services without innovating the uninnovatable process of driving from A to B purely through marketing. Yeah. Let me see what y'all are saying. um, hmm. I'm just reading these. Well, Coral Mark says we might have some luck with something as abstract as a pencil for a logo. I mean, it's abstract, but it also meant something. People who are familiar, Pedro Castillo basically, went around the country with a big ass pencil, saying, "Vote for me. We'll rewrite the Constitution." And obviously, he was a teacher too. Right, and so I mean, obviously it's like a metaphor, but I found it to be very concrete. I think you could do something similar here. I can't think of a good symbol, for example, for like Medicare for all, but I think a good gimmick, I think, is actually a good lesson from Pedro Castillo. Is that a lot of times you have to remember that people don't follow politics very, very closely, and sometimes being able to get your message across quickly is a great strategy. Kyle says, David, I was a little sad to know that the Sounders striker who scored that goal against Austin signed that anti-Castillo statement from the Peruvian national team players. Well, that is a shame. Not too surprising for me. I don't know whether establishment people either don't, Jordan says, I don't know whether establishment people either don't know or are lying about incentive structures. When they suggest climate change can be addressed mostly through the markets. Well, the thing is, people need to be prepared. I mean, if you're talking about climate change, like, you have to be prepared for the shift. I mean, we still do have outright denialists, but even the big oil companies now are putting forward their green plan. And I think that it's really important for people to recognize that this is just going to be a part of the marketing. Both for corporations and like for capitalism in general, and it's something that we need to be very wary of, and also being very supportive but critical of green alternatives, because people do recognize too that's a huge money making operation. We can't get into a situation where we just create new powerful monopolies of green energy and green technologies. I mean, we need to recognize that we got into this problem because of a system of private profit being put over the public good, and certainly over the environment, and not to replicate those systems within our solution, because you just won't get out of it. The fact is that while there are going to be there's going to be plenty of opportunities for people to make money off of greening the economy. We can allow this to just be, a profit engine. These things need to be socialized, and by that I mean the cost. Like, we can't just go for the cheapest option for all of these things, which is what market incentives will do, because cheapest certainly doesn't always mean best. And says, Michael saw us as a community rather than just an audience. I wish Michael was here to interview me next time I run. He'll forever inspire me. Rest in peace. Well, I know he was always very inspired and proud of your work. And yeah, definitely consider it all. I consider you all too to be a community as well. It's a very nice thing, and a wonderful thing to be able to hold on to. Well, let me see here. I want to keep on. I'm happy. I have a couple more minutes to answer questions. I want to see what we have, because we got a lot we're going to talk about on this tomorrow. This is I think a great example of nonsense. Just going back for one moment about the kind of job market stuff, despite all the things they say about how great it is. Katie on Twitter says, I had an interview today and was told to come back tomorrow for an unpaid 8-hour trial. What? And Amy says, hey, Twitter family, my daughter's applying for a new job. They want her to come in to work tomorrow for a few hours, maybe 4 or 5, unpaid. I say, hell no. What do you think? So when I first started working restaurant jobs, I've had to do that, or at least had to come in and basically be paid no tips for a training shift, and it's obvious what that is. It's hyper exploitation, because they act like they're going to sit there and train you, but they're basically just getting free labor, or like extremely cheap labor for a day. That's one of those things that if you look at that and you're one of these people who doesn't work in the services industry or any of those jobs, sometimes people don't really realize how hyper exploited those workers are. Look at that, right? And again, these are anecdotal, but look at that right now and tell me that we have a booming economy, right? The fact is that if there are all of these job openings out there, there should be some kind of upwards competition to increase wages and stuff like that for workers. But what you see is these industries, and I'm assuming that these are restaurant or retail jobs, right? That those industries are just so addicted to cheap and exploitable labor that they're not changing their conditions at all, right? So you want to sit there, you want to sit there and act like the reason that we're in this kind of crisis right now, or this moment, is because people's unemployment benefits are too high, when that's what people are coming back and asked to the conditions that people are being sort of pushed back into work at. It's absurd. It's absurd. That's clear as day that is an unfair position to put a working person in, right? Do you think that the class dynamics have changed this much, right? That now we have, a labor movement that is able to say no to all of these kind of things. No, they're still doing it. No wonder people aren't working in a lot of these places. It's such a joke. William says, David, have you been to Lucy's Fried Chicken since you've been back in Austin? I have, and I hate to say it, but feeling downhill. Not as good as it used to be. I don't know if that's just a post-COVID thing or what, but I used to go there and be very stoked to have the chicken. I still will go, but it wasn't. It was a bit better a few years ago. Yeah, and I assume Clayton's. We're talking about the the nonsense about showing up to work. Unpaid. Clayton says, I always have had to do that. It's such a joke. Jake says, have you read, you're going to read the new Chomsky, David? No, I didn't even know there's new Chomsky. Well, Alex, these are just me usually on Tuesdays, but Matt will be with us tomorrow. Yeah, I mean, it should be illegal. How exactly do they get away with that? I mean, the way they usually, they don't present it in this way. They present it as like a kind of like God, what's the term that they use? It's something like, like on your feet interview, right? So you're being interviewed and, and trialed. It's a joke. It's obvious what it is. Jake says there's a Huffington Post piece that'll make you clinically depressed, so I'm not going to link it, but it really shines a light on how low paying and what a huge percentage of the job force pays. Yeah, I don't have those numbers in front of me, but it's striking you when you see the division in American society when it comes into wages. Kyle says, why hasn't competition started kicking in the job market? Well, it's because the government is very, very happy to create crisis situations to force people back into work. Oh, this is going to be good, yo. Charles says, for some country music levity, I can't wait for the Ballad of Dude and Juanita release. I think Sturgill is at home in bluegrass. And again, for folks who aren't familiar, definitely check out Sturgill Simpson. He's going to be releasing a new album coming out soon, right? September, or is it August? I'm really looking forward to it too. Server dislike, how exactly does one work towards organizing labor movements in right to work states, especially in retail warehouse environments, if there is no willingness for a general strike mutual aid? Well, organizing labor unions is a very, very in-depth process and takes time. And it takes a hell of a lot of organizing, and you need to start to get to points of like 75% of people in your bargaining unit wanting to join. Right to work states obviously mean that you're going to be at severe disadvantages, but that doesn't always mean that your union's going to be weak. We talk about Bessemer, but also UMWA is in New York City right now protesting outside of BlackRock, and that's been a union, or at least a local there, who have really shown a lot of resiliency. That's in a right to work state. So I think that we can't ever let these things just become excuses in the sense of like, oh, I can't fight because of the conditions of where I live, but also understand that these things just they take a lot of on the ground organizing. And I don't know if you're talking potentially about something that you're interested in doing, but there's definitely people to link yourself up with if you're really trying to consider it and build power. But willingness to push for a general strike mutual aid project. I mean, general strike sounds great. But I don't see that kind of organization right now. I mean, it is one of those things. Is like you don't get those without the pre-organizing that's necessary. And I think that's the thing that going back to what I was saying a little bit earlier. That's the thing that I think we have to wrestle with a little bit. That it's just not enough to say, okay, well, here's how you have a revolutionary movement, or like, here are the 10 best policies that we want. That's great. That gets us in the door. That gets us thinking. But the next step is to start to get serious about how you build that. And the thing is a general strike as like a concept. It's one of those things that just doesn't happen overnight. So I think holding on to that as a solution rather than a goal, for example, would be a bit of a mistake. Val says, no, we're happy to hear from you. How do we get people to trust in the political process again? Mutual aid wins at the local level, organized is quite vague. Yeah, well, I would say, again, at least in the United States, is probably not the right word, right? I can't see any time in my lifetime that the political process has seemed like it's working. Mutual aid is nice to build community networks, but I think having explicit political organizations is really critical. How do we do that? It comes through um, rebuilding labor unions, rebuilding labor power, and then also building organizations like the DSA, like the PSL, like the SA here in the U.S., and also equivalents in the United Kingdom, right? When labor was at its most powerful, you had almost complete connection from the social to the workplace to the political sphere with working class organizations, social organizations, political organizations, and what has happened since those have been almost completely wiped out. Community organizations have been almost completely wiped out in the United States, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel also in the United Kingdom. Isolation is very, very high. And the commodification of any kind of socializing or social life has become sort of a fact of life under neoliberal capital. And I think it's right that we talk about the union busting, right? Aspect of neoliberalism. But the social busting was critical too. I mean, socialism, not sound goofy, but socialism is social. It's about building social power. And the destruction of community has been a very critical weapon that our opponents, that the bosses have been using against us, and rebuilding those communities. So community organizations, but I would argue, and most importantly right now, socialist organizations. That's what you have to do, and it might not be like it's a tough thing sometimes to wrap our heads around because it means a lot of work, but there's growth in the work. Doing the work is part of building those bonds, right? That's what we have to do, and I'm sorry, just like there's no way around it. I do think running high profile political campaigns can be helpful just because that's something that people pay attention to and it attracts them to a movement. People like to be on the winning team. So I think engaging in that in a smart way is critical, but that also means to not be putting forward as mastheads or sort of figureheads of movements, people who aren't really wanting to be a part of these organizations going forward, right? I think endorsing can be really great, but there's a problem with propelling people into power and then having them sort of lead these social organizations. I hope that's helpful. I'm sorry. I'm just reading. I'm trying to catch up on the questions for y'all. Um, yeah. Unionizing is really important work. I still think that fighting an organization like the DSA, again, like we talk about the DSA law and everyone gets really worked up about it, and I think rightfully so. It's important questions to wrestle with, but I think it's important to remember that these are like spaces of conflict and struggle and growth and change. And I think just discounting that because like, oh, I don't like this member, I don't like this thing, I think can be a mistake. Yeah, general strikes require the infrastructures to be built. Um, a general strike can't work if everyone is broke and starving and has healthcare tied to employment. I mean, yeah, we have to be able to build the ways to sustain ourselves and also know that we're going to do it for one another. Um, Here we go. And the Bernie movement was really huge, and it made a huge splash. But this post Bernie moment has been very difficult. I mean, the fragmentation has been immense, and I think that is sort of why we're in this kind of theoretical like morass that we're in right now, where a lot of people had become so attached to doing politics in that kind of venue, that without that coalition, without the possibility of the Bernie campaign, a lot of people don't know where to turn. And I don't think that. I think that the call to do the Bernie movement was 100% right. We are in such a better position now than we were then. But I do think that, just, and this is self-criticism, myself included, there should have been a lot more focusing on how to build resiliency for it, instead of just continue to, to hope that was going to work again in 2020. Yeah, but like, our friend Black Brit says a general strike can work at any time if there's structure to support it. And that's true. The main problem is there's no chance of a meaningful general strike yet. And I think that like the kind of, yeah, I mean, I think everyone's sort of wrestling with this question here too. It's just these kind of things are exciting, and that's a flex of a very organized working class and a very resilient one. And hopefully in that scenario, one that was, committed to socialism. I think the problem right now is that we haven't built that, right? So like hoping that it's just going to happen, I think is incorrect. And just hoping that, I don't know, if we don't build the social organizations, the community organizations, and the worker organizations necessary, like you have to understand that even at the times, like if you're looking at the Soviets, right? Even at those times, the amount of organization, and I don't just mean like everybody's a card-carrying member of like the Communist Party. I mean organization in the sense that like people went into social spaces together, right? When you had time off, like you had a community to go to. The separation of many people from community in that like large sense has been eradicated, and it's not an accidental aspect of American capitalism and just global neoliberalism in general, that the assaults on the community have been instrumental there, right? So again, it goes hand in hand with the assault on unions and workers' rights, the destruction of the social, the destruction of the communal. I mean, Margaret Thatcher, when she said this was the triumph of neoliberalism. There is no society. There are only individuals and families, right? That is the goal of atomization of neoliberal capitalism, is to destroy the social, because they recognize that our very human nature, our desire to be communal, our desire to be a part of a social block of a community, is antithetical to their interests, their long-term interests, capitalist interests, and recognizing that if we want to be able to do these big social things, and what I mean, like a general strike, that's a social activity, right? That's a bunch of people getting together saying, we're going to stand together to get something that we want. If we don't start thinking seriously about reconstructing that space, we're just gonna be thinking about it. We're just be dreaming of it. Well, Dave's saying stuff about crowdfunding. That might be an interesting point regarding unions, but I do think that there's a lot of lessons to learn from Bessemer, and I think the Jane McAlevey piece really broke down, I think, a lot of my feelings on it now. I don't know too much about Marissa Wood. And again, I don't think these things are easy either too. I'm also saying I don't have all the answers to how to build the community and the social organizations myself either, right? I'm just trying to, we have this ability to all talk and to organize around these kind of things, and to start thinking about what's working and what isn't working. And, we have to be doing this work together. So I'm always happy to hear your thoughts on this stuff. I think, so tomorrow, I mean, I guess we'll do the show tomorrow at 7. We're going to be joined We're going to be joined. Oh Jesus. Um, Matt will be with us as always. We'll be joined by Ben Spielberg. Going to be talking about Medicare for all and health policy and that kind of fight, which I think is going to be an important conversation, and much more. So please join us tomorrow at 7 Central, 8 Eastern. We'll be hanging out, and I'll let you know too soon about what the bonus episode is for patrons. If not, if you're not already a patron, we can always we appreciate the support. We're really trying to build this out, and one of the big things that we talking about community. Just before we go, the big plan with Left Reckoning over the next few months, once we're able to get the funding, is to start taking the show on the road. Not necessarily doing the live shows that we were doing with Michael, but going to community, doing some more on the ground reporting of strikes, but also talking to community leaders, community organizations across the U.S. And hopefully eventually across the Americas, about what they're doing, what they're thinking, what they want people to know, and trying to be at least a media hub that's very, very much rooted in directing people towards things in their communities or sort of extended areas to be on the lookout for. That's the aspiration. Don't come from money or anything like that. So we're just trying to find ways to be able to fund that. So that sort of is like what the growth potential and the growth goal of Left Reckoning is. So all the support that goes to that is very helpful for us. Please always feel free to reach out, and look forward to seeing y'all soon. See you tomorrow afternoon.